What's up, Trekkies? It's your boy Will Wofford here with Trekker's Delight, a Star Trek-inspired podcast. Before we get started, we're going to give away $100, so make sure you like, comment, and subscribe to our channel where we will announce the lucky winner every single week. Now, welcome to Trekker's Delight.
All right, that's some exciting news, guys.
Nice, that was awesome.
So, like, comment, and subscribe if you want to be entered into that competition. Now, I think Officers Danger are going to lead us into this week's discussion with a summary of what happens in Little Green Men.
Captain Danger here with Lieutenant Commander Danger. It's a good thing the Federation did away with that pesky rule about married couples serving together. But yeah, so we're talking about DS9's episode Little Green Men today, and this was a pretty hilarious episode overall. It kind of starts off at DS9. Nog is getting ready to head to Starfleet Academy for the first time, so he's selling all his personal belongings, and in a kind of funny little scene there, we see Worf actually buying a tooth sharpener, Ferengi tooth sharpener, which is kind of funny.
He had to try.
And Quark ends up getting gifted a brand new starship from somebody who's one of his shirt tail relatives. That had said if he ever made it big, he'd give Quark a ship. So,
yeah,
of course,
wasn't it a shuttle, actually?
Yeah, it was more like it was a pretty big ship. Anyway, it had a big cargo hold. And so, of course, Quark volunteers to escort Nog and Rom to Earth so that Rom can start Starfleet Academy. And Rom doesn't realize that initially that his brother's got a nefarious plan. He's hiding this hazardous substance in the cargo hold. He's smuggling it. It's not supposed to be smuggled. And so anyway, they set off for Earth, the three of them. And they're approaching Earth, and all of a sudden they realize there's been some sabotage, and the ship's continuing to accelerate to the point at where it's going to tear itself to shreds. And so Rom figures out that if he vents some warp plasma, I think, into the cargo hold where this volatile substance is being smuggled,
because that's smart.
right, it'll blow them out of warp, and they'll crash, but at least they'll be alive and they'll be on Earth somewhere. So he does that, and we hear them all screaming, and then the next thing we see is Quark sits up and he's on a hospital bed in what looks to be to us anyway, a rather, or at least to Federation era folks, a rather primitive lab. Come to find out that not only did it blow him out of warp, but it blew him 400 years back in time to Roswell
1947.
in 1947, right? And so, you know, they don't know much about Earth, but Nog has a book, or a tablet, not a book, but a tablet that he was given before he left the space station with some all information on Earth history. And so he remembers seeing the uniforms, and he thinks they're in Australia. So anyway, more hilariousness is because their universal translators don't work. And so, you know, nobody can understand each other, and they're, you know, trying to figure out how to communicate, and the Ferengis are trying to hit their heads to their ears to try to get their universal translators to work, and the American officers there think that that's a welcome greeting of some sort, so they're all banging their heads back and forth together. And turns out that hidden away on the ship as a stowaway was the beloved station's Constable Odo, who suspected that Quark was up to no good.
Shocker.
Right?
Yeah, shocker.
And so he stowed away on the ship. Well, it was luckily for them that he was, because he ended up helping them to escape. Because by the time the show is drifting towards the end, the Americans decide, well, maybe we need to dissect these guys to learn more about them, or something like that. So, but
well, in the American defense, Quark did actually offer to sell them out to the Russians.
That's true. That's true.
So that was a thing.
Right. So anyway, they luckily, they happened to be in 1947 when there was a lot of atomic testing going on, and Rom figures out that since the Odo managed to get the engines back in working condition, that if they fly into a recently detonated nuclear explosion, atomic bomb or whatever, they can use the beta radiation to activate what's left of the hazardous substance they have in the cargo hold, and that should shoot them forward back in time. And it works. And so jump forward in time, and they're right in Earth's orbit, right at the right time for Nog to beam down and start his Federation Starfleet training. So there you have it in a nutshell. There's a lot more hilariousness in there, but
It's a lot of slapstick.
pretty good
It really is.
episode
It's a great
overall.
episode,
Pretty
right?
humorous.
It's a great
And I
episode.
like anything with time travel. So what'd you guys think?
Arish, you have thoughts. You always have thoughts. Give us
I
your
always
thoughts.
have thoughts. I mean, this episode is one of my favorites. It's like you said, it's just funny. It's a good comedic one without being like it's comedic without being ridiculous. I mean, it is ridiculous, but with the Ferengi, and especially with Armin Shimmerin carrying it, it works so well. The Ferengi are just a fantastic first contact to have for something lighthearted and fun. It's just enjoyable all around.
Yeah, I like the. There's some great lines in it, but one of them is where they're in the room with the American officers and that are kind of trying to communicate with them, and they're smoking, and Quark is like, "What is that smell?" And Nog says, "Oh, I think it's tobacco. They inhaled it. It's a poisonous substance." And Quark's like, "Really?" And he goes, "Yeah." And he goes, "Well, where do they get it?" "Oh, they grow it and they buy it in stores." And he goes, "If they'll buy poison, they'll buy anything."
He's not
So,
wrong.
and he's pretty much right.
This was apparently, I was reading before this broadcast, that apparently that was actually really controversial to have all this smoking in this episode. And this was at a time when, Hollywood was developing a big aversion to portraying smoking. And
Sure.
the suits really didn't want to have much, if any, smoking in the episode.
Right,
Whereas
despite the fact that 1947,
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and
It's-
all the writers were pointing out that we're parodying the alien invasion genre here, and all of those movies historically just have massive amounts of smoking in them. Everybody is smoking constantly. We literally
Right.
can't do this without somebody smoking.
It's almost as if the tobacco industry was funding films at that time.
Oh.
What?
Wouldn't
you
surprise me.
don't say.
But to get a little serious right off the bat on that it does play into one of the things I really like about the Ferengi and DS9 in general, is that the Ferengi are the Star Trek's most dislikable species in a lot of ways. They're these, greedy, in many eyes ugly, misogynist little trolls. But consistently across DS9, and especially in this episode, we see them, that for all their faults, as less monstrous than humans. Just in the comments about how, we never inhaled poison like this, and especially when they start talking about the atomic bomb testing later, like the Ferengi are just floored about nuclear weapons and atmospheric testing, and these humans are absolutely insane.
Right.
Which
Right.
I've always, and there's other episodes in Deep Space Nine where Quark has similar commentary, and I've always enjoyed that contrast of for all that the Ferengi get are, like I said, creepy little trolls a lot in Deep Space Nine. We get this kind of mirror held up a lot of, yeah, but they haven't done
what we did.
much awful stuff as humans have.
Yeah, and I thought it was.
Like that if I can interject for a second and play off of that, one of the things I like about this episode is they sneak a lot of Ferengi culture building into this episode, which is not something you would necessarily expect in what is clearly, and now for a comedic interlude kind of episode. We get to hear about the Celestial Treasury. We get to hear about the Celestial Auctioneers and the Divine Treasury, and how you have to bid on your next life. I mean, we get like an entire kind of crash course in Ferengi religion, which is not something we really get a chance to see. And it's great because it's kind of played off as this like funny type thing. But how many times have we had conversations? Like, we've had conversations like that. Like, yeah, no, this is the belief structure. Blah, 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 blah. Kind of like filled out in our real lives. And it's really fantastic that we finally are getting to see what the Ferengi are in their bunny slippers.
Right.
I was just thinking about that actually, because the difference between the Ferengi and, well, there's a lot of differences between a lot of species between DS9 and TNG, but TNG, they were more like they acted more like trolls, whereas in Discovery they look more like trolls, and in DS9 they have a lot of characterization. Like, we actually know about their culture, we actually know more about their beliefs. All we know about them in TNG is they like money and they act like trolls. That's it. That's
and
it.
They have laser whips.
And they have laser whips, which we never see again. I actually
right?
like that.
And like also that unfortunate love of fur that comes out of nowhere.
Yeah.
When TNG started, like in the first introduction of the Ferengi, if I remember, they were supposed to be like the new big bad species.
They were supposed to be, yeah.
And they didn't work at all doing their weird little dances or whatever they did. They were obviously just not intimidating.
Yeah, that was laughable in their first appearance.
Yeah.
But
didn't they make noise too? Weren't they like?
Yeah.
There was a lot of hissing. There was a lot of hissing. Correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't Armin Shimerman in that as well? Or was
he
it
was.
Yeah, he was.
Him and Neelix, I think.
And Ethan Phillips?
I think you're right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
I kind of wonder like how he felt like watching this species evolve. I know he's talked about it and talked about being kind of like, well, apparently I just inherited the ears. Never left.
It's a little bit. I read a little bit of his commentary on this episode, and he was saying, he loved it because it involved so much building up the Ferengi species, and I think it was in the third or fourth season. It was a big kickoff point for doing a much deeper dive into their culture and their personal interactions and family structures.
Yeah, I mean, we know it's fairly late because one of the things they talk about Commander Sisko, or, Gabriel Bell looking suspiciously like Commander Sisko.
Which means that history has definitely been changed, but not so much to the point where it's where it completely undid it. I mean, it's saddening that we can't see Gabriel Bell's original face, but Sisko had to do what the Enterprise did in First Contact, literally, like go back and do it yourself. Because it's like, if you can't do nothing if the person is damaged or dead, so.
Well, right, but I mean that was just like a timing.
It was, but what I also wanted to point out, and this is just a personal note, any episode with Quark and Odo is a perfect one for me. Any one of them, they are best friends and frenemies at the same time.
Right.
I just believe that. Like, they cannot be one without the other. They have a deeper relationship, in my opinion, than Batman and Joker.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I really believe that. Just like Joker admitted that I'm not Joker without you, Batman, and you're not Batman without me. I don't think Odo and Quark are Odo and Quark without Odo and Quark.
That's fine.
Yeah.
My wife is watching Deep Space Nine for the first time, and I've been rewatching it with her. And we're still in the first season, and she commented, we should make a drinking game out of Odo and Quark. Every time Odo says, "I'm keeping an eye on you, Quark."
Right, wasn't your comment to her that you didn't want to die?
That was what I followed up with. Like, that this would be a fatal drinking game very, very quickly.
Yeah, no, you would die.
Yeah, love Odo. I love him. Contentious. So cool.
Well, let's go back from the Ferengi for a second.
Yeah.
Can we talk about the humans and the portrayal of humans in this particular episode? So we've got effectively two camps, right? We've got the soldiers with the form of the captain, and then we've also got Nurse Garland and her fiance, Dr. whoever. I can't remember his name. What kind of stereotypes are we playing with here?
I like that they brought the politics into this and they actually said it. I liked that they kept it an all Caucasian base. I liked the accuracy of that given the year that it was. And I liked some of their attitudes. It's not as brutal and hardcore as I would have made it if I directed it. But I think it's in the ballpark of the times that they were in. I mean, like you said, it was a jumping point for them to smoke in there alone. So I think I liked it. I really did. Like when the general was talking, throwing shade on the president, I was like, no, he didn't. Okay, cool.
Which is
the general came across as pretty accurate to me.
Stereotypical general.
Very hard-boiled, very suspicious. There's a commie under every bed kind of a thing, and these guys aren't telling us the truth. They're up to something, and we're going to have to do whatever we have to do to get it out of them. And that scene where they're all being interrogated and each one of them has a different story as to why they're there. And of course, the general only believes the one that involves the invasion fleet.
And which is literally no different than what we have today. You believe the craziest story because it's the craziest story, which sidetrack for about 30 seconds. Rios tells what really happened to the freaking ICE officer, which is actually, if you think about it, I think that's a pull from Little Green Men, because I kind of thought about that when you just said that, and to just tell him the craziest story, and he's just like, yeah, let's take you to that what's it called, sanctuary.
Right.
Hey Manny,
I'm glad you
of
just
all of us, you have probably had the opportunity to meet actual generals or like commanding officers. What do you feel about this?
It's American. It's different.
It rings true to you. Is that what you're saying?
None of my business.
Well done, Manny. Well done.
I love it, and I'm here for this.
No. Tell us the tea. Tell us the tea.
No, I think it's a classic trope. The 1940s or 50s general. It's super campy. I love it for how self-contained. Futurama did a great homage episode to this. It's fantastic. What a great intro. I've been throwing up graphics, by the way, while we've been talking, trying to get.
Thank you.
No worries. One of the most fascinating parts of all of DS9 is the exploration of the Ferengi. And this episode pushes that plot in such a positive direction. I love the line, like there's a later line when Quark is upset with Sisko, and he's like, because they're talking about Earth, they're talking about how fast they got warp travel at one point. They're like, it took us 9,000 years to get to the same place that they did, and even then we had to bargain with someone. But even in all of that time, they never did the things that we did. They were never as cruel. They never had slavery in the same way that we did. They never had atomic wars the same way that we did. So they gave the Ferengi a backstory that softened them in a way that endeared them to me and makes the ending of DS9 more believable when Rom becomes the Grand Nagus and moves into that. That wasn't some like smash cut to like Rom being like and change. It wasn't some Deus Ex Machina. There were steps that showed you the Ferengi softening and that this was a critical time in the Ferengi world. So this episode was really key to showing you how that family value structure between them as a family moving on in the plot of DS9. And one of my favorite parts of all of DS9 is the evolution of the Ferengi. Is that you took this non-human species and gave them a non-human perspective and let them evaluate humans. One of my favorite scenes in all of DS9 is Quark serving a root beer to Garrick. It was one of the bases
the
for
Federation is like root beer.
Yeah.
It's an amazing monologue.
It's insidious. That's where I got opposite tracks. That's the
Well, and I think through the whole of DS9, we see Quark becoming or developing a lot more humanist qualities, I think, where he actually became more altruistic and was always more, I mean, he was still always kind of up to his little shenanigans, right? But he actually, obviously cared for Odo. He cared. What's that?
That chemosite's not going to smuggle itself, Danger.
Yeah.
No, that's right. But he was more altruistic. He actually cared about the other people and the other officers on the station, and more often than not, ended up doing the right thing. Even sometimes if it was by accident. But I think we saw that more and more towards the end of the series.
I also like that we start to see the character arc that we're going to see with Rom, right? Because in this one, he actually, in a lot of ways, Rom's the reason they all get off. Like Rom's saves the day, right? I mean, he's the reason they're alive. Right. And there's this great exchange, right, where Rom is basically letting Quark know that he knows that there's chemosite aboard, and that the whole point of this is that they're smuggling chemosite, and Quark is looking at him like, when did you get smart? And Rom's just like, I've always been smart. I've always been clever. I just didn't have the self-confidence to do it.
Right.
And you talk about how Rom, or Manny mentions how Rom becomes Nagus later on in the series. And I think this is kind of where we start to see the roots of that, where, Rom is starting to take back a little bit of his own sort of power in this dynamic that he's got, with Quark and Rom, where, as seasons 1 and 2, it's very much Quark yelling at Rom and Rom kind of scurrying away to go do things. And it's awful, right? And even Nog, when he discusses going into Starfleet, it's, he's like, my father could be a wonderful engineer and he would be great at it. The problem is that he was born Ferengi, and I don't want to be there. That's why I want to go to Starfleet. And that's what sells Sisko on the whole business.
Yeah. Do you guys think that Rom would qualify, based on what we see in this episode, that Rom would qualify as the Ferengi equivalent of Spock?
I really feel like he's the Ferengi equivalent of MacGyver. Right? I don't think it's necessarily Spock, because Spock has all of this classical Vulcan training behind him.
Sure.
And
he's more the O'Brien. He's more the O'Brien. O'Brien's his idol.
Yeah, O'Brien's his idol, but
good point.
But Rom very specifically is doing things like, do you remember there's this, I can't remember, it's the one where everybody gets caught, it's Armand Bashir, where everybody's caught in the transporter, and O'Brien goes down and is looking at how it's all hooked up, and he's like, is that a spanner? Do you have a wrench connecting your circuits? What's going on? To me, that's Rom has been learning on the job and learning to do so much with, stopping, if I may invoke MacGyver again, stopping a nuclear meltdown with a candy wrapper, some gum, and a clothespin or something.
Right.
And that's what Rom is doing. I mean, Rom is sort of...
But let's face it, I mean, the calculations necessary to figure out how many beta particles he needs to get that chemosite to blast them 400 years back in the future to the exact point where they needed to be, that can't have been an easy calculation.
Well, no, I was going to say, what was he looking at? Now, we know that Star Trek makes literally anything happen. We know that.
Oh, yeah, sure.
It's all magic, right?
Even with the Prime Directive. But here's the thing. First of all, I can see how you can mess up going back in time, but to go back to the exact point where you were. Now, normally what you would do is you would go back to the exact same location and recreate the whole thing. Well, clearly they can't do that because they don't have enough. So they have to go into a nuclear explosion. Now I
Right.
get all that; it has a lot of power, but baby, what? And then you somehow transported above Earth's atmosphere. I don't know how that happened. I loved it, but I want to piggyback on something Marie said earlier. Um, I assume that a few of us here have watched Golden Girls here.
No, I've never seen it.
Okay, cool.
Nope.
Well, anyway, I was just saying, I know that's a lie.
I mean,
So we have Dorothy, Blanche, Rose, and Sophia. When you said that, Marie said something about Quark and Rom, and then Rom later becomes, I think, or that was Manny, later becomes Nagus, right? And normally, what we see in the first few seasons is Quark being the strong one, talking over Rom like he's an idiot. Is that not like Dorothy and Rose? Like, and then we find out in the sequel show Golden Palace that Rose becomes the strong one because Dorothy left, and you find out that Rose was smart all along.
Right. She
Now,
just
her
didn't
logic-
I
say
gotta
it.
tell you, I actually have never seen Golden Palace. Like that is not, and that's not.
I didn't even know the show existed. I didn't even know the show existed. It's on YouTube. It's free. I didn't even know the show existed. I just saw that Rose was freaking brilliant the entire time, and she was telling the truth. Each of her stories were truth. Now, how she says it may be different than the way we say it, but
Yeah.
they're brilliant. Just like
Yeah.
Rom is brilliant. And I just wanted to make that comparison. I'm not saying they pulled that relationship from that, but it just reminded me of it so much, how you really don't know what a person is capable of until they put into certain situations.
I just want to throw to Eris. I think she had a point.
Yeah, she had a point earlier.
Oh, yeah, I was just going to say when we were talking about Rom's brilliance in calculating these time jumps, I mean,
Yes.
if you're following Picard, and minor spoilers here, they have to plug a born queen into their ship
Just
in
Right.
order to calculate these jumps.
Good point.
That's
There is-
exactly what I was thinking. Yeah.
Mhm.
Also,
Rom is
can we
just
just
like
have a moment to
spinning it off the
appreciate
top of his head.
Annie Wershing as the Borg Queen? Just let's just take a moment and just call her out as being phenomenal as the new Borg Queen. I am loving
Yeah, she's
it.
great.
Loving it.
Well, to follow a little bit more on Rom, I think he's just a great portrayal overall of you can. What was it? Someone was it Einstein? I'm trying to remember my memes here. You can have the smartest fish in the world, but if
Yeah.
the test is how well you climb trees, it's
It's
going
the
to
fish in the tree conversation, yeah. It's
look
Einstein.
really stupid. Rom is a great example of a character who is obviously very, very intelligent, but the cultural context he was born into is completely not set up to allow him to thrive at all. He has no intelligence for being a prosperous Ferengi.
He's like his dad.
And that's
Tell
Nog's
her.
point. That's Nog's point to Cisco.
Yeah.
When he's arguing for Cisco's recommendation to get into Starfleet Academy, right?
Yeah.
That we talked about earlier, because Nog is just like I could do things if I can not necessarily get out of his culture, because I do think there's a lot that Nog embraces about being Ferengi. One of my other favorite episodes is actually
with
after
O'Brien, right?
Nog is in Starfleet, and it's I can't even remember. It's something and the Great River.
It was when they get the gray uniforms, and Nog is talking to O'Brien.
And literally, Nog is using his Ferengi acumen to get components that everybody needs, and it's just this amazing kind of. And there's just so much going on, and it's beautiful because it's very Starfleet, but it's also very Ferengi. And
Which
it's
is
a
not
great
something you would imagine meshing well. Like so much
Right.
of how the Ferengi are set up is that they are culturally like everything the opposite of the Federation. But to see a moment where Nog really gets to shine, even in Starfleet, is cool.
But like,
And I thought it was
not
a
even just shine, but shine because of his inner his Ferengi nature. Like that I think is this gets kind of sold short, because there's almost this argument that Nog is, leaving Starfleet because, Ferengi bad. No. No, and it turns out that like Starfleet can benefit from Nog's difference and this culture
Yeah.
that he's coming from, and I think that right there is so important to see. That
I thought it was kind of cool too when we see earlier in the episode when they're at Quark's bar and they're selling Nog's stuff off, and Worf is.
I was just thinking that. I was just thinking that. I swear to God.
Yeah, he's talking to O'Brien and he's saying,
Mhm.
I don't think having a Ferengi at Starfleet Academy is such a good idea. I don't think this is going to go over well, kind of a thing. And O'Brien turns to him and he says, well, people probably said the same thing when you went.
Right, I wanted
Klingons.
you to go over and drink your prune juice and think about how racist you just were.
Right.
Say, like,
Right.
and
Right.
I like that as cantankerous as he is. I love that Worf showed that, like, because it's like, and then O'Brien turned it on himself, and it's good that it's someone from the Enterprise voicing that, because I don't think Worf would have responded the same way if it had been anyone else. Because he knows O'Brien. Him and O'Brien are, well, in a sense, comrades when it comes to serving on the Enterprise together before it crashed.
Yep.
But
Right.
yeah, I loved that. I was really just thinking that, like, it shows how there are different viewpoints that comes into this, and now we have a whole to respect. What's the actor's name? I forgot his name. That played Nog.
Michael Dorn.
That played
Eisenberg. Eisenberg.
Yeah.
Eisenberg.
Eisenberg. Yeah.
Yeah, they named a ship after
The
Nog's
Eisenberg
character, and now we see, even though they definitely look like trolls now, we see more Ferengi in Starfleet. So that's hey, great.
I'd be more excited if they could get to speak.
I'm scared to let them speak, because I'm scared because I think because 1 minute, like I think that they are still feeling sorry for themselves for how they did the Klingons in season 1. That noticed that we didn't hear a thing about them in season 3 and 4. We don't see them, we don't hear about them, we don't bring it up. None of that. So they already knew that they were treading on thin ice when they brought a Ferengi looking like the way it did. No, we can't give you any line. No. It's not your time. It's not your. Whoa. Like, yeah, we watching. We watching.
But we've got lines from a Tellarite, even though I didn't actually know he was a Tellarite. I'm not gonna lie, that was a redesign that I didn't know was coming.
I thought it was a hog or something. I don't know. Like,
I mean, Tellarites may have taken. There may be some inspiration there.
I like
What
so
do we,
many things about Discovery, but their need to consistently radically redesign species. Just I don't understand why we're doing this.
I mean, they don't have to do it. Like, it's
Right.
like, I'm like, I mean, you obviously have the rights to the character and the look, even the names. Why are you changing how they look? They're supposed to look like giant,
We have
big-headed.
covered this.
I haven't.
In
Did
Trekkers
we?
Delight with Manny.
What did we say? What did I say? I was gonna have a standard answer for you, but what did I say?
No, that it was particularly when we're seeing the Andorians and the Ferengi and all of these other creatures that we're looking at almost 1,000 years of additional evolution.
Yes.
And so people are not going to look the same way they do. Going back to Little Green Men, that's actually one of the things I really love about this episode, right? Like, that they have to have the universal translator.
Yes.
And even though I get it, they're speaking Ferengi or whatever, and humans are speaking, what we now know of or think of as Federation Standard Basic American English, it kind of drives me bananas every time they go back in time and there's communication that goes on. Because I'm over here like, y'all realize that there is so much time difference between this language and the language you would be speaking in the 24th, 31st, whatever century. I mean, it's like if I tried to go back and talk to Chaucer, sure, I can puzzle it out and I have a general sense of how it's pronounced.
Yeah.
And I'm not even talking Old English here, guys. Like, I'm talking Chaucer, right?
Sure.
Who spoke a dialect in London that eventually evolves into what we recognize as English. But if I'm talking to Chaucer, it's going to take me a hot minute.
I think it's a device. You only have so much time on an actual episode. So let's say, we need to like
I'm
allow
not
these
arguing.
things.
And in fact, I think that's the whole point of the UT, right? Like the Universal Translator is just sort of like a hand wave so that we can have our story. I get that.
Yeah.
But it was kind of nice to see that broken a little bit in this episode.
Yeah. I would also point. Okay, so two things. I would also to address William's idea about the different morphologies, and I think this is a larger thing in Star Trek. And I have made this point or whatever. When they were first constructing the Klingon language, which I believe is the first Star Trek language that was actually brought into the real world.
Klingon
And
and
yeah, there was a point on DS9 where they mentioned that there were like was it DS9? I think over 50 dialects. Like on the planet, just like on planet Earth, we speak all these languages and we have all these different morphologies. It makes sense that there is no standard Klingon, just like there's no standard human, and that what you're seeing is actually a geographical, ecological morphology that's like indicative of different parts of the evolution of that planet. Now, I'm not saying that is necessarily the case, but this is how I explain it away. Is like, oh, they've changed them. Oh, maybe they're from the south. I don't know. Something. I don't like the global south. The global south.
Be careful there, Manny.
Are the Discovery's Klingons were the crazy Bible Belt Klingons as opposed
or
to...
they're from the north, and Doctor Who, he's like, every planet has
It's got a
north.
Wow.
I really like that, and I like that we're starting to see differences, and that they're paying attention because for so long, right? Like what a Klingon looked like, and there was. I mean, I don't know if anybody else remembers, but when Tim Russ was cast as Tuvok, there was a whole discussion about whether black people could be Vulcans, right? Like, I mean, because everyone's like, every Vulcan we've ever seen looks like Spock, looks like Sarek, looks like whoever.
They were white.
And we're all like, why not? Like,
Which
Not used to seeing that.
Did they not think that through? It's something I've always wanted to ask. Did they not think that through in naming Tuvok, knowing that Tupac was just there not a minute ago, and then they had the nerve, the audacity to make him look like Tupac when they went back in time? Did they not think about that? Were they making a joke? Like,
I feel like
I honestly
Star Trek
don't
writers
know.
probably had absolutely no idea.
they probably didn't know who Tupac was.
Probably not.
Oh, bless
They were
them.
more Biggie fans.
So,
And I mean that in the most southern way. Bless
But
them.
and we get the same thing with to jump universes a little bit.
in Star Wars. I was about to talk about Finn.
Lord of the Rings is going through the same problem right now with they're casting people of color as elves
I noticed that.
in this TV show, which I have big problems with the direction they're announcing for this TV show, but because of things they're doing with the lore, not at all related to having colorblind casting. I think that part is great.
We're not used to diversity in these programs because they're artifacts of time and space. And so what we're seeing is the normalization of like demographically, statistically, like on the planet, you'd have so many black people, so many white people. So statistically, you should have like so many black people, so many white people, whatever. But because that time in, let's say, California and Burbank or whatever it is, where these Vasquez Rocks, where these places were shot or whatever, white people were put on camera by other white people. Now, it's not white people's fault. It's an artifact of.
People's fault.
It's just. I'm just saying, like, it's not today's white people's fault. Like, it's just an artifact of time and space. And so we live in this time where we're catching up, but we all have these memories of, we can look back on the 60s and say, well, I'm reminded of DS9 when Cisco's like harumphing and he doesn't want to go to 1959 Las Vegas. Mm-hmm. He's like, what's wrong? And he's like, I don't want to. What's my problem? 1950s Las Vegas. And then Cassidy's like, the way it should have been, the way it could have been. The gently sort of normalizing of Star Trek and all these other shows. If it bothers people, it bothers them because it wasn't happening all along, or it bothers them because it's not the way it's supposed to be. Either way, it shouldn't bother them. It's just us catching up to like what it could have been.
And I think that's a really great conversation to have, actually, because well done, Manny, well done. Because Star Trek literally embraces the concept of IDIC at its core, right? I mean, infinite diversity and infinite combination. And it's interesting to see the same backlash that we saw in the 90s with Tupac occurring now. There are real conversations going on with a certain subset of fans. And it's kind of disturbing because you're just like, literally the point of this show, guys. The point of the show is to encounter that which is different.
Right.
And that which is new. And that which does not look like you.
But it's in degrees. You test it a little. You have a on-screen kiss. You have you have a black captain. And then some people will say not far enough, and some people will say too far. And you'll find in context a medium where most of us reside. And at the margins, in that confidence interval, you'll find the extremes. And we're only as comfortable moving that mean as far and as close as we can, like skew that like statistical probability. You can't do it all at once because it won't catch on.
I guess my point is that it's a little
you've got to find that line and keep pushing that line of acceptability further and further back. But you can't. If you make a giant leap forward, you risk so much pushback that you're going to lose all the gains you've made so far.
I mean, I personally would watch a Star Trek that was where the entire cast was transgender, trans-species cat people or something like that. But
patience,
radically leaping lines is something I'm pretty comfortable with. But
okay,
and
I do think we need more cat people. We need more Caitians.
Caitians.
They are cat people. Thanks, Kirk.
Right.
I'm sorry. Like I know a lot of people hated number 5, but I'm just saying.
He did make triple-breasted cat girls canon.
And they mentioned
Yep, Linda, that face. That face.
Since we're kind of itching into the final 15 minutes of the show, it's a question of the philosophical side of First Contact. And I direct this question to Manny again. Now, we've seen throughout all of Trek lore that Earth has had multiple extraterrestrial encounters, dating back as early as the Greek period. I forgot.
You were stealing my thunder. This was literally what we were going to get into.
Wait, for real then?
So we got the Greek period. We have T'Pol's ancestors. We have the Green Men. We have technically
you have Enterprise on
and Voyager.
That's right, Carbon Creek. I'd forgotten about
Carbon Creek. And then now Picard, and then Gabriel Bale. But anyway, all that. So, but even though we're on the First Contact concept, and I'm directing this to Manny, how do we define First Contact in this scenario? Is it because at the end of this show they wrapped it up as if it never happened, as the Americans normally do. Sure. So. Like,
it's a weather balloon.
It's a weather balloon, and that became like a thing. Whereas in First Contact, the movie, which I'm not gonna get into that too much because we're saving that for the actual day.
Sure.
It was a warp-capable species saying, "Hey, we don't mind you seeing us. We don't mind all of you seeing us.
Yes,
and we want you to come with us to the stars, even though we're gonna treat you like you're shit." So anyway,
which, to be fair to the Vulcans at the time, humanity
was kind of a
dumpster fire.
Yeah, and they knew that, They knew that, But anyway, so how would you define First Contact in Trek in comparison to First Contact protocols that we have here on Earth now?
As you did, and as we said from the last episode, when we talked about the episode First Contact, when you have these sort of enclosed, small First Contact operations that kind of get cleaned up or tied off, like who's going to believe you kind of scenarios, that isn't First Contact to me because they are, they're not population-wide. It's not part of the ethos. It won't change the culture. You won't have this reaction to an entire population, right? And so to me, that is First Contact is when you can you can go to school the next day and say, "Do you hear about the aliens?" That's First Contact. And The other ones are limited contact or like whatever political, and they've happened so many times in the Trek world for many different reasons. The beginning of the Star Trek movie, right, when they like come out of the water and they save Spock and stuff like that, and it influence like a whole culture and stuff like that.
That's
and that happens so often,
That's
right?
But
but how often do you find that it happens to a civilization that's never had contact with an alien species? They still think that they are the center of the universe, and human beings at that time were. The Zefram Cochrane age had not officially encountered alien species. They were venturing out into outer space. They were still sending probes. They were hoping and wishing and praying. And it wasn't until first contact day that you can say that they had first contact. And so what I would define as first contact philosophically is when a population is aware of extraterrestrials.
Then I think First Contact Day wouldn't have been First Contact Day in that case, because we were dealing with, we know from the film and from various other Trek franchises that, humanity was basically working and operating in isolated communities, and there wasn't a whole lot of communication between them. So I guess the question then is like, when then would that have happened, and how did that communication start like spreading? I think I think it would be really interesting. Like I understand why.
Can you rephrase? Like,
give me a second.
Okay. One.
I understand why they cut the movie where they do, right? With the handshake, because that's such an iconic kind of scene. But I would be really interested to see how that information starts to spread, because again, like I said, we've got humanity existing in relatively like bombed out, isolated, kind of post-apocalyptic pockets. There's not really an indication.
That's a really good point.
There's a tremendous amount of communication between these individual communities. Like there are nods that there might be like larger, sort of oligarchic groups that have more power or less power. But I mean, like we're kind of in the middle of Mad Max, y'all.
It's a post-atomic horror, yeah.
Yeah. So the question would be like, so Carbon Creek didn't count. So 1947 Roswell doesn't count. Like all of these other things don't count. In by Manny's argument, then would First Contact Day count, or is it just literally an arbitrary kind of?
I think when the Vulcans made contact, they would have sent emissaries. They would have made official. They would have been like, "Okay, you're a warp-faring civilization." They wouldn't have left right away.
Because
they would have stayed.
If I understand right, they'd been already observing Earth for quite a while, but once Zefram Cochrane made the jump to warp speed, that's when they decided to come and make a physical presence here. So I think that first landing we see, that's the first contact, and they're starting to establish diplomatic relations. And maybe it starts with that one isolated community, but they're coming to Earth now, and they're in my mind, they're not just going to isolate themselves to that one community, right?
So I think that if I can push in on this briefly here before we lose the thread, I think it just occurred to me that we're talking about how establishing this first contact bit in Mad Max Zefram Cochrane world would be difficult. I think it'd be difficult now. I mean, even if the Vulcans landed tomorrow, I think over the past 6 years we've seen remarkable resistance to people having their understandings of the world challenged. I mean, I can imagine where, hey, cool, all of science in every civilized country says, yeah, there's a Vulcan ship in orbit around our world teleporting people down. And you're still going to have 40% of the population screaming, this is fake news because they want to give us universal health care.
Yeah. Or worse, you'd have people saying this is the start of an invasion. We can't trust them. We got to blast them out of orbit.
And how
I think back
to
many
shows,
Independence Day.
How many stories have that right there?
Yeah. Independence Day, where the people are out shooting handguns up at the alien saucers, right?
It's the most
American. We don't want to start any planetary war. They said, please stop firing at the saucers.
Truthfully,
I'm sure that's the way it would be, because think of how many preconceived notions of certain people, and I'm thinking certain religious groups that say, humans are it. we're the pinnacle, we're made in God's image, and that's all there is. And that's going to throw that all out the window. So you're going to have a lot of people that are going to be panicking, and because their core belief systems are going to be threatened by the appearance or the proof of the existence of aliens, extraterrestrials.
And that will give the birth to xenophobia.
Yep.
Right. And so this also begs the question: how would an extraterrestrial society pick? You know, because what's interesting is, like, in all of our other first contact situations that we've seen on screen, there's been, for the most part, one planetary government. Like, they've all gotten their proverbial ish straight and are now like all part of one society. But like, if that happened today, that would not remotely be the case. And so how does a Vulcan, you know, hanging out up in space, arbitrarily pick a civilization? Do they pick based on population? Are they going to China? Are they going to pick based on like cultural exports coming to the United States? Are they looking at ancient civilizations? Are they going to Egypt or what's left of Syria?
I think you'd have to carefully observe the world that you're going to make contact with for quite a while to understand the different power centers of that planet, right? Mm-hmm. And then when you do make contact, you pick certain planetary power centers to make simultaneous contact with. So in our case, maybe that's, you know, the superpowers. You do China and you do America and you do Russia or whatever the case may be, but you make a simultaneous landing there and let them know you're trying to make contact. And but you know, it's going to be challenging because
are we hitting the arrival now where they just you know, like targeted various locations and are like, we're just going to throw stuff on a map and see what happens.
I think you take one look at humanity and say, oh hell no, and you know, nuke the whole thing from orbit. But
peace, guys.
We're looking at humanity through the lens of as being human beings. You know, whatever alien species that like eventually, if they do make contact, and we do know for a fact that there are UFOs in the sky, that if they were to see us or to feel us or whatever it is to make contact with us, they would do it from a scientific or mathematical point of view, my opinion, of course, that they would look at the chemical basis of the cultures. Where's the densest populations? Where you see communication centers? And sometimes in Star Trek, you see these things. They're like, take me to your newest communications device. And like, a phone? Like some easy way that you could have said it or whatever. But to them, they don't think in the same way that we do. So maybe they're going to a shipping magnate. Maybe they'll think a CEO. Maybe there's like some smoking room of like some like rich people who meet in secret and actually run the world. Maybe they'll like contact them, like in X-Files.
I mean, from that perspective,
God, there's a nightmare scenario.
My point is that we have a political infrastructure that they may not even be aware of, and they'll only see the capitalist, materialist goods of things crisscrossing the planet. Maybe they'll make contact at like a airport or a seaport, because they'll know that that's like where we, you know, that's what they would do. That's where they would dock. You know, that sort of thinking, you know. I'm just saying.
Bringing it back around, that might be where the Ferengis would go to make first contact, to shipping magnets or, you know,
No,
the
I
heads
mean, I
of
think that's a
industry.
really, really excellent point. You know, their cultural background is actually going to influence, and their value systems are going to influence how they value the activity on this alien world. And, you know, I think that's a great point that Discovery makes in the back half of the most recent season, right? Is trying, like, when you're trying to figure out how to communicate with an alien civilization, like, you've got to think in terms of, this is alien.
Yeah.
We may not have anything at all in common.
Some of the things that now
that we recognize, and so we've got to break that down, and we've got to figure out where that commonality actually is.
There's been certain conversations ever since Voyager 1 that when we sent Voyager 1 out with that disc and whatever, that how silly of us was to send something that, you know, auditorily or visually, that those stimuli may not be actually how we communicate. There's a great episode of Big Bang Theory where they sort of come up with these things. I'm not saying that you should watch that show. I'm just saying that they thought, well, it should be haptic. If there's anything that they have to have some sort of, they have to live in the physical world and have a tactile sensation. whether the hydrocarbon thing comes from. And by the way, that's the back plot of Ender's Game. If you ever watched read Ender's Game, there's this whole species of viruses that communicate with hydrocarbons, and it's nuts. That there's a chemical sense and a physical touch sense that you could be communicating with that we don't really use. For instance, the Voth in an episode of Voyager, the dinosaurs that are far, far off. And there's a great I love these throwaway lines, why I remember them. They talk about their primitive sense of smell. And they're like, yeah, their sense of smell, it's not great. He's like, I doubt they would enjoy the sulfur pits of Borat or something. And because all we smell is sulfur, right? But to them, it's like complex and like there's more to it.
Right.
You know? We hear one trumpet, they see an orchestra. You know? So anyway, that's my point, is that whatever it is, and if it's non-human, we can't really conceive of it. In fact, we have to leave the galaxy in order to conceive of the 10C. You know, and for a long time, Marina Sirtis, I'll say this to William, once she was asked a question, how come we never see non-humanoid species?
I remember that.
And she's like, as soon as you give me a non-humanoid actor, we'll have a non-humanoid species. It's a great, tongue-in-cheek line. But my point is, and they have to leave. And my theory on that is that critical base species, the one that like brought them all together in that episode of TNG where they all had to like get pieces of DNA and it said that they left seeds. Right.
Yeah.
That's why all of the species in our galaxy have like humanoid form, and that you have to literally leave our galaxy to find non-humanoid species. That's my theory as to like why that you'll find only like humanoid forms in our galaxy.
It's completely plausible because we've seen evidence of that in Discovery.
Or we're all or every humanoid species across the galaxy is basically a crab, and this highly useful form has evolved multiple times.
Right. It's
Convergent evolution.
Convergent evolution, yeah.
Also, what Lower Decks has given us dolphins is
cetacean hops.
Yeah.
Right. Which, loved that part. Loved that.
Did you say dolphins?
Yeah, there's a whole sequence where like Boimler has to go and dive down because the dolphins don't have hands and they can't reach this hatch. And so Boimler has to dive down and he has to reach.
It's a great throwaway gag from
there's an entire like section of the Cerritos that's actually just a bunch of flooded rooms and corridors where
station ups.
Because we've seen other aqua species throughout Trek that were spacefaring. I thought that was really cool.
There was a book actually, and I don't remember the title of it. I read it like decades ago at this point in time, that introduced the idea of an intelligent cetaceous species that was part of the Federation and interacted with normal crew members by wearing like a wetsuit with anti-gravity.
That's exactly what they did in the Lower Decks.
This was exactly what they did in SpongeBob when they brought Sandy and SpongeBob together.
There's a link I did not expect was going to happen, like in this show.
Right, SpongeBob.
But all right, we are coming at the end of our hour. Do we have any final thoughts we want to share before we say our goodbyes?
The Ferengi are awesome.
I felt
really am so happy. Mm-hmm. I'm so happy this episode exists, and you really see the non-human ideation like reflected. We have our values reflected back to us in this episode, and we see how monstrous we are compared to them in some ways. And so what I love about this is when we often put our own like ideas on a pedestal, when we often like galvanize what we think as being like good and true and just, and you see them in the eyes of another culture, another way of like being and stuff like that. It helps us evaluate what we really think of as good and true.
To be much less philosophical than Manny, my cross species, my cross fandom, my love of cross fandom things really wanted to see this episode reference to the X-Files somehow.
That would have been awesome, wouldn't it?
That would have been amazing.
I loved all of it. If I wanted to take someone on a date back to my place and they said to me, I want to watch Star Trek, this would be one of the episodes I would consider watching, because it's not, most of Trek
it's self-contained.
Right. Most of Trek as of right now is episodic as of right now. Not climactic as we see later on. So this is kind of like a standalone episode, but it ties so much with what we know to be true or not true, but what we just know in general, that they can easily make a comparison to it. My top 2 favorite moments in the show, and this is going to sound weird, when they make it back to Earth after traveling back, and the first thing that Nog says, "Did we make it? This doesn't look like the Divine Treasury. What year is it?" That moment felt so scripted. Like I could literally read it as they were just saying it, so like that. And at the very end where Quark says, "Rom, get my lawyer. See you in a few weeks, brother." And he's just smiling, and you're just like, "You little shit. You I don't know what you did, but you did something." That's all.
All right, Commander's Danger.
I loved it. I thought it was a great episode. I loved the 1947 era stuff and the way they decorated the room and the actors that they got to play the military folks and even the scientist and his wife in there, or his fiance, I guess.
We're perfect.
Yeah, just was the great little comedic episode and perfectly accentuated the Ferengi and the way they are, because you always kind of view them as a little comical anyway. So
Right.
I think it was just a perfect show. So loved it.
I loved it. I would love to think of that couple as Zephram Cochrane's ancestors. I'm just gonna throw that out there. the Federation.
All right, guys.
Yeah, I thought Nog was particularly devious in the way he kept getting Umox from the nurse.
And she didn't know, so it's like
Right. That was brilliant.
Yep. I love that Deep Space Nine gets to make sex jokes. It's kind of amazing. All right, guys. Thank everybody very much for coming. Thank you, Linda, for actually joining us for the first time. We hope to see you again. Thank you, Eris, for joining us. And as always, thanks, Manny and William. We would really appreciate it if you would like, subscribe, and comment. Let us know what you thought. Let us know what you'd like to see. And I certainly hope you spend time with us for the rest of our First Contact Day journey. And we'll see you next time.
later.
Bye-bye, all.
Adios.
Now again, I'm gonna say this again because we're near the end of our show. If you are our allies, we are not talking to you. We are not talking to you. This does not. Okay, we're not talking to you. Stop trying to take our and make it your business. It ain't got nothing to do with you. It ain't got nothing to do with you.
Our experience of grief independently.
Bruh.
Yes.
I love that they're in the comments.
So much is like I'm just reading the comments.
Yeah. They should broaden their child out. It's such a good point, Will. God, that's such a good point. And he's really thought about it too. You should be here. William, get over here.
I thought he had a girlfriend on Insta. It's been ages since I've mucked about, but
Okay, moving on. Let's move on.
we gotta move on.